Give me all your gold, give me all your silver, give me all your gold, give me all your silver. And even if I'm gone, I can still deliver. So give me all your gold, give me all your silver.
So if you by chance have missed the last week or two, we are in week 3 of a 4-week series called Making Change. We got the idea from Craig Rochelle. We're really taking it in kind of a different direction, but every week we're focusing really on these 4 key thoughts. And if you haven't been with us, here's what they are. Week 1, we talked about less is more. Less is more. And the reason we said less is more is because people who believe more is more tend to seek God less and less. And so we just talked about the fact that less is more. There's a biblical principle there that comes into play. Last week, our college-age young adult minister, Alan Tiger, did a bang-up job talking about the fact that stress is bad, that when we make bad financial decisions, it brings bad stress into our lives. And I thought he just did a great job with that. I also thought it was ironic because I was walking around last week. I was in the lobby. I was downstairs. I was over by the nursery area. I went out even into the parking lot. And I thought it was a little interesting last week because just by the nature of everything we had going on last week, our services ran over by probably 7 or 8 minutes last week. And I know that, things are a little tight here. When we're trying to get all 3 services inside so that the last one starts by 11:30, we tend to get a little tight. And last week was one of those days when I'm sure that the 10:15, those of you coming into service last week and trying to leave, it was chaos last week. It just really was. I think we just had a lot of people back. And there were just lines out there in the parking lot. There were lines in the nursery. There were lines everywhere. And I thought, how ironic that all of you probably walked into the 10:15 service and we were like, hey, stress is bad. And you were just like, no kidding. I was doing fine till I came to church. And so anyway, sorry about that. We try to work with that, but it just kind of reminds us that we're in the need to make room for more. So we're working on that and trying to create a little more margin. But that was week 2. Stress is bad. Week 3, today, we're going to talk about giving is good. Giving is good because when we give, we resonate with the heart of God and we begin to love people more. We love God better. And then next week, we'll talk about tomorrow matters. Because until you really believe that tomorrow matters, you're not going to change what you're doing today. So less is more, stress is bad, giving is good, tomorrow matters. Today, I want to talk about the fact that giving is good. I really want to defend this truth that giving is good. In fact, will you just say that with me? Say it with me. Giving is good. I really want to defend that truth because I think for a lot of us, we partially believe that's true. We partially believe that. I know that there are Christians who believe that to be true because if you look at statistics, those who give to religious organizations, charitable religious organizations, give twice as much as those who give to secular organizations. People who are given to religious organizations are oftentimes religious people. They give twice as much as people who give to secular organizations. And I believe that to be the case because as I look at the generosity of Christians, even here at Northside, I have seen generosity off the charts. I've seen individuals, members here at Northside, provide the monthly income for people who came into a major crisis or because someone died of cancer and they were trying to minister to a family and they did that month after month after month. I've seen that happen. I have seen Christians right here in this church who have provided for the medical bills or funeral bills or helped with a mortgage or other things to take care of people who were struggling and in need. I have watched people right here at Northside who have bought a car or given a car to people who were in need. I could go on and on about the generosity I've seen. So it does not surprise me that Christians would be twice as generous. I would believe that easily just based on what I've seen with my own eyes. But at the same time, before we get too excited, I want us to look at the generosity of Christians in America. I want to take a big picture view of that because while I have seen it happen in some amazing ways, I also think we should look at the numbers. Because when I told you that Christians are twice as generous as people who give to secular organizations, here's what you need to know. People gave 0 0.9% of their income to secular charitable causes. You multiply that times 2, and you get to 1.8%. Not so impressive, is it? Wow, we're twice as generous as everybody else. We give 1.8% to charitable causes. Yeah, it's not so impressive. And then when you look at what Christians in America are giving to their churches, which is more than this, it goes up from 1.8 charitable organizations to what they would give to their church. They give 2.5% of their income on average. Christian households on average give 2.5% of their income. Still nothing to really brag about, 2.5%. And I was asking the question this week, why is it so low? Why so low? Here's what I discovered. Tithing has decreased in America. So 10% of what we make has decreased in America almost every year for the past 3 decades. The percentage is now lower than it was in 1933, the depth of the Great Depression. So we give less of our percentage of our income today than those of us who went before us and were in the Great Depression. So I'm just kind of wondering, what has happened? Where has the generosity gone? One study calculated that if all church members in America lost their jobs and went on welfare and just tithed from their welfare, contributions would go up 35%. So let's just pray that we will all lose our jobs this week. I mean, why is that? I read the statistic that said those under the age of 35, only 2% of adults under the age of 35 tithe. And before all of us who are well over 35, and I'm included in that number now, before we think, yeah, well, we must be keeping things afloat, we give a whopping 5% of us do that. So what is happening? Somewhere, somehow, along the line, we stopped believing giving is good. So I want you just to think to yourself, do you really believe that? Do you believe in your heart giving is good? Even if you don't, just say it with me one more time. Say it. Giving is good. Giving is good. I want to defend that truth today. I think sometimes we just need a little bit of reminding. We need a little bit of reminding that giving is good. And so today, to do that, if you have your Bible or device, I want you to open up to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And we're going to look at a church today who needed a little bit of reminding that giving is good. As you open up to this text, and you may want to read those 2 chapters a little bit later, but just to get the context, it was a year earlier that the Apostle Paul went to this church in Corinth. And he told them about the Jerusalem Christians who were destitute. They were struggling to make it, struggling to survive. There were numerous reasons for that. One was because as Jews became Christians, they were ostracized socially and economically. And so because of that, they were really struggling financially. They were struggling to make it. They were destitute. Another reason was because there was a food shortage in Palestine. And because of overpopulation, which culminated with the famine of AD 46 in the time of Emperor Claudius, that famine brought all kinds of hardship into this region of the world. In addition to that, Jews were subject to twofold taxation from the Romans and from the Jewish authorities themselves. They were struggling. They were in a tough spot. And when the Corinthians heard about those Jews in Jerusalem, brothers and sisters in Christ who were struggling to survive, struggling to make it, they became eager to help. They wanted to engage this. They wanted to help their brothers and sisters, and they even gave some at the moment, but they were going to take funds over the course of the following weeks, and they were going to give to them and give generously to them. They were excited to do it, and Paul was thrilled because he knew that this would demonstrate the unity of the church to the world when Gentile Christians in Corinth were helping Jewish Christians in Jerusalem, that they could see the love of Christ in the Spirit of Christ and see these lines just being torn down, these walls of hostility being torn down as they showed the unity of the church of Jesus. Paul was thrilled about this. So he leaves. He leaves Corinth to go north to Macedonia. The map kind of shows you where Corinth is in Achaia in the south, and Paul goes up to Macedonia in the north, and he starts telling the believers of Macedonia about the Corinthians' response to their brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. And the Christians of Macedonia, they get inspired by the generosity of the Corinthians, and they decide that they too are going to give to this great cause. It's more than any one church could do, or one group could do, or a few churches could do. They're going to join the effort, and they do. They start giving generously, and the funds are collected. And Paul gets word that the church in Corinth, now almost a year later, as the funds come in through Macedonia, the church in Corinth had done nothing. They had promised. They had not received. They had made promises, but they had not collected. They needed to be reminded that giving is good. And now we got a difficult situation because Paul and brothers from Macedonia, these brothers from Macedonia are soon going to be coming down to Corinth and saying, man, we were so inspired by your generosity. And all the people in Corinth will be going, oh, shoot, because we haven't done anything yet. What an awkward, embarrassing moment that would be. And so Paul's writing to the church in Corinth saying, let's not have that, because I know if they come and you've not yet collected, you're going to feel obligated to do something, and you're going to be giving begrudgingly, not because you want to. That's the situation. So let's read about it. It's right here in 2 Corinthians 8, 1 through 12. Let's read this text, and here's what we read. It says, and now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. Okay, so the Corinthians, they encouraged the Macedonians, and now Paul's going to use the Macedonians to motivate the Corinthians. He says, in the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up into rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. So we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. I'm not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. And here is my judgment about what is best for you in this matter. Last year, you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it, according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. What we see in this text, I believe, are easily three reasons I believe giving is good. Giving is good. And here's the first one I pick up from the Macedonian church. Giving is good because everyone can be generous. Everyone can be generous. I think we tend to think that when I have more to share, then I will be generous. When I have more, then I will be. That tends to be how we operate. When I have more to share, then I will be generous, which is really faulty thinking. Because those who believe when I have more, then I will be, tend not to be so generous when they have more. In fact, when we look at the poorest of the poor in our world, they are the ones that teach us that everyone can be generous. It was Paul who was looking at the Macedonian church, and he says, man, they had extreme poverty. The word can mean rock-bottom destitution. The word is used of a beggar who has nothing and no hope of gaining more. He's like, that's what the Macedonian church is like up there in the north. They were poor themselves, not as bad off in that moment as what was happening in Jerusalem, but comparatively, especially the Corinthian church, they had very little. And yet they were showing and demonstrating rich generosity. Paul even says they gave beyond their ability. It was beyond their ability, but it wasn't beyond God's ability. God took that which was lacking and insufficient and unimpressive, and he multiplied it, and he used it in a huge way. And we need to be reminded, generosity can occur at every income level. Generosity can occur at every income level. I've seen this in my missionary travels, and those of you who've been on missionary journeys, you've seen it too. When you go into a place that has far less than we have, because nearly anywhere you go, that's going to be the case. And I remember going to Kenya with my son here, with Paul and Pam Highfield, when we were building the church in Ndonyo. We got to go dedicate that building. And I'm walking into areas, and they're coming out of mud huts, but they're coming out with belts as gifts for us. And they're coming out with a scepter. I guess I'm a king now of some kind. And I came out with a goat on a rope. You know, I've told you that story. I got to take home, I didn't actually take home the goat, but they wanted me to. So I had a goat on a rope. And whenever we would eat together, and I would look at what they're eating. I might have a bowl of broth with potato and goat meat in it, and I had many pieces of goat meat. And you might look at them eating their soup out of a plastic Ziploc bag, and there may or may not be goat meat in there, but they were generous. They were giving. I remember when Kim and I in 1993 went to Russia, and we were doing a mission trip there, and we went into a school, and we were doing a presentation, and the principal had us in his office, was visiting with us. Next thing you know, he's taking some pictures off the wall to give to our team because he wanted to give us something, and they didn't have much to give. I've told you the story of the boy who at the crusade that night, he gave us his pet rat in a basket so he could take that back to the States. And so we just dumped it in Florida. I don't know what's happening there. Some type of weird species is developing there now. So just kidding. We didn't bring the rat back. But, you know, everybody can find a rat. Everybody can come up with a rat eventually. So that means any one of us can be generous. We see that all over our worlds. You see, the truth is that people who say, when I have more to share, then I will be generous, they never become generous. If we're not a generous people now, we're not going to be a generous people later. One of my favorite stories about this that I think illustrates it beautifully is the story of Rick Warren, who is the pastor at Saddleback Community Church in California and who wrote the book Purpose Driven Life. Just this last week, my daughter was asking for some books to take back to college, and so I gave her Mere Christianity. She hadn't read that one yet. And I said, have you ever read Purpose Driven Life? And I don't think she had, so I sent her with that book as well, which reminded me of this story of Rick Warren. He and I, we go way back. Rick's a good friend of mine, and this is his wife here, and we spend a lot of time. No, they don't even know who I am. We were at a conference at their church, and they were doing a little book signing there, and I jumped in there and got a picture with them, so that's kind of my claim to fame with Rick Warren. But anyway, he doesn't know who I am, and he would never remember that, so we'll just move on. But, I love this story about Rick Warren because, when he wrote Purpose Driven Life, he had no idea that book was going to become the most popular book in the world, second only to the Bible. Within months, 1 million copies were sold. Within about a year or so, 60 million copies were sold and growing. This hardcover book, Purpose Driven Life, just boomed and went like crazy. Well, obviously, all that income and royalties from that book just started pouring in to Rick Warren's lap. And the question becomes, well, what did he do with all of that money? And when we were at that conference, Rick Warren was telling us his story. And Rick said to us that when the money poured in, he decided he would do 4 things with it. I wrote it down. He said he would not change his lifestyle. He would live in the same house and he would drive the same car. Number 2, he set up 2 foundations, one to help hurting pastors around the world and another to help hurting children who were orphaned by HIV and AIDS. The third thing he did is he paid back his church, the salary, all of the salary he had earned as a pastor at Saddleback, which he planted the church. He paid the church back all of that salary, and he refused to take a salary from then on. Everybody here say amen. You'd love that if that happened here too, right? And then, number 4, he decided to become a reverse tither. He was going to live off 10% and give 90% or more. Those are the first decisions he made when money started to come in from those books. And Rick Warren said this. He goes, I firmly believe that the only reason God blessed this book and used it the way he has used it is because he knew what I would do with the money. He goes, anyone who thinks, well, if I had a bestseller and I made all that money, I too would be generous and I could become a reverse tither. And he says, no, you wouldn't have. No, you wouldn't have. Not if you're not already taking steps to do those things. Not unless you're already generous. Not unless, and see, Rick, when he, early in his life, he began to increase his tithe and their giving to the church. It went from 10 to 11 to 12 to 13 to 14 to 15% of their income. They were already doing those things. And so Rick would say the reason we could be generous is because we were already generous. And so when you think about that, you realize that he was generous in times of little, just planting a church with nothing to show for it. And he's been generous in times of plenty. The Macedonians are an example of being generous when you have little. And Paul's going to use that with the Corinthians to encourage them to be generous when they have plenty, when they have much. We can be generous with little and we can be generous with much. Giving is good. Everyone can be generous. And I just want you to ask yourself the question, do you believe that everyone can be generous? Do you believe that giving is good? I'll tell you another reason I think giving is good. Giving is good because giving is a privilege. It is a privilege. You don't see this very often, the attitude you see in the Macedonians there in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And you just don't see it. Where they urgently pleaded. It means they were begging Paul for the privilege of giving generously. They were begging him, asking with him, pleading with him. That's so different than what most of us see. You see, most people beg to get. The Macedonians begged to give. Completely opposite. Mind-blowing attitude. I mean, when was the last time you heard someone just begging that we would take up the offering already? I don't think I've ever had that happen where I'm preaching away and there's like, please, Wayne, just stop. Now, they have said that, but not this other part. Wayne, would you please stop? Can we just take the offering already? Please, can we just give? I beg of you. I can't stand it any longer. I just want to give. Would you just, somebody pass the offering? Offering, offering. You know, it's never happened. Not one time. Now, maybe there's some people who feel that way. They think that way. You know, man, it's a privilege to give. But I'm not sure if we quite have the attitude that the Macedonian church had. As they knew, as they gave, and they collected on a weekly basis for this, and the Corinthian church was encouraged to do the same, that those funds could be used for the gospel and used to help people in need. I remember years ago, Ken Eddy in our church told me his story where he said, hey, he enjoys, he says, we used to be the ones that gave to God after we had paid our bills, and if we had any money left. In fact, we thought since God owns everything, why should we give back what he already owns? And in addition to that, they were turned off by what they saw in Christian TV programs. And he said somewhere along the line, he goes, our thinking changed. And we found that giving first to God was a blessing in itself. He says, we heard someone say, you cannot outgive God. And that's a true statement. We found it to be true in our lives. We look at what we've given to our church and what we've given to other Christian organizations compared to our salary, and actually it amazes us what it totals. The most amazing thing is we not only do not miss it, but there's money left over. It used to be what we concentrated on was paying the bills and having very little left over for things including tithing. And now we can honestly say that when we give now, not only are we blessing others, but we're being blessed by God in a big way. He goes, I don't know how he does it, but he stretches our money further than we ever could. And now when we hear of the need, we ask, how can we help? How can we help? Their thinking has totally changed. And what you're going to find is that generosity is contagious. That once you start, you receive joy in the giving. And so Paul says this, 2 Corinthians 8:7. He says, but since you excel in everything, in faith and speech and knowledge and complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. To excel means to exceed. To excel means to become excellent at something. To excel means to become excellent in this area of your life. To go far beyond what you would otherwise. It means to ascend. It means to go to a higher level. It means to step it up in some significant ways. So I want to illustrate this. Mark's bringing out a little step stool because if I were to illustrate how I think most people have given, I would say it's like this. It starts out with maybe one step. I call these people, these are the ones who give out of necessity. Necessity. In other words, what motivates them is the consequences if they don't. If they don't give, they don't get to keep the membership. If they don't give, they lose the benefits. If they don't give, they lose something. So the consequences would tell them, okay, I'll give. It's out of necessity because I have to. And some people, when it comes to their excelling, this is about the level they get to. It's one step because they have to. There's some more ladders coming here. Anyway, this step right here, okay? Move this one over a little bit. This step right here. This is the one where I would say they take a few more steps up the ladder. By the way, watch what they're doing, because when I get over there, I want to make sure this is in good shape. Okay, so this is what I call giving out of obligation. In other words, what motivates you is guilt. You've been taught that you should give. You know you should give. And so you'll take a few more steps up this ladder. And you'll do a little more than you would do otherwise because of guilt. Guilt is a motivator, and you feel bad, and maybe you see someone else do something, you feel like it's unfair if you don't. And so guilt can be a motivator. And this is where some of us land, and this is where some of us stay. There is another motivation. This ladder here, by the way, this is from 2007, Bales. This ladder is from Bales. They never picked it up, so if you know anybody from Bales, you can send them over. Anyway, this is from the original build here at Northside. This is as high as I'm going on this one. This is what I would call you're motivated by the benefits of giving. There's benefits. Sometimes benefits for others, and you see how it benefits other people, and so you think to yourself, you know, you like how it makes you feel when you give to someone else and it helps them, but also how it benefits you. You know, tax deduction, your name in the back of the program. You get on that certain donor list, recognized there. You like that. And so you may even do more than you would do out of guilt because you like the benefits of what it does for you. But when Paul talks about excelling in giving, none of those motivations are really motivations we want to use. And so Paul would say that to excel is to ascend to a higher level. You don't trust this ladder either, do you? And so I just want you to think about the fact that people who are generous have unlimited possibilities, and they continue to ascend to a higher level. And I just want you to think for a moment about your own generosity. Are you motivated to give because you believe giving is good? People who believe giving is good, they excel to new heights. They do things nobody else even thinks about doing. They do things that encourage other people to give because they take steps up the ladder. This is the Macedonians. This was the Corinthians at one time, but somehow when they got in the busyness of life, they began to take some steps down the ladder and descend to a different place. And so let's give a hand for Mark and Jay for saving my life. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. That's awesome. This is the kind of church we want to become. One that excels in our generosity. We're not motivated by these other things. We're motivated because of a God who is so generous to us. And so Paul says, these Corinthians from Macedonia, they learned that it is more blessed to give than to receive. And they learned the joys of open-handed living. And they discovered what giving, how it grows our love for God and for people. And they learned that giving is an act of worship to God. It points upward to Him as we give generously. And so Paul says in 2 Corinthians 9:7, each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. I love the way Eugene Peterson says it in the Message. He says God loves it when the giver delights in the giving. The giver delights in the giving. And I just want you to know giving is good. It is a privilege. I just want to remind you of that. Just like Paul's reminding this church. And last of all, number 3, giving is good because God deserves our first. He deserves our first. Paul says it this way. He says the Macedonians gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us. They gave themselves first to the Lord. The order matters. They didn't give themselves first to their car payments or first to their mortgages or first to their dream cruise or first to anything else. They gave themselves first to the Lord. It was planned generosity. Notice that. It was planned. Paul tells the church of Corinth, you need to start collecting weekly for planned generosity. Yeah, we can be spontaneous, but it's better when it's planned. And Paul goes on to describe to them their giving is not because of pressure. It's not because of obligation. It's because of the grace of Jesus. He says, I'm not telling you, I'm not commanding you. He wants to inspire them. And so he tells them to look to Jesus, who became poor for their sake, so they could become rich with every blessing that he gives. I know Corey read an incredible list of the giving that God's given to us. He's given us peace and joy and fellowship and reconciliation and hope and healing. Jesus gave himself first to us. He gave himself, first to his Father, but he gave himself for us. Should we not give ourselves first to him? It's easier to surrender a part when we've already surrendered the whole. When all you have is given to God, then giving to others becomes the natural reflex of your soul. Generosity should be a lifestyle in our church. It should not be a one-time event. This core value we have at Northside to contribute in ministry, we say it this way: we will give all we have to gain all he has for us, is rooted in this principle. Giving is good. I'm going to give you some practical steps for that during our decision time today, where we talk about how we can give our time and our talent and our treasure and our testimony to Jesus, how we can give ourselves, our hearts, our lives to him. But first, I want us to really reflect in this moment of giving ourselves to the one who gave himself for us. Paul says he was rich in every way, but he became poor for your sake. So I'm going to ask you to stand to your feet. We're going to sing this song. If our servers would be dismissed for our time of communion, we're going to prepare our hearts for this fact that God gave us, the Father gave us Jesus. As we take communion today, we're going to remember his death, his body broken, his blood shed for us. If you're a follower in Jesus, we just invite you to partake of this remembrance of him, just to get your heart and your mind right. Because where this all begins is by first of all looking at who he is and what he's done for us. Let's sing together.
To God.